Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another wonderful tasting with the Virtual Tasting Society. Today, we have a very special treat for you. We are doing a tasting of not one brand, but we're doing a a portfolio of brands. We are tasting today with the famous David OG, the spirits buyer from our very own K&L Wine and Spirits, based here in California. They have 3 locations. A lot of us know the Hollywood location. There's 2 in NorCal. Right, one in Redwood and one in San Francisco.
That's right, and a fourth hopefully opening in Culver before the end of the year.
Yes, that's awesome. So they are, as some of you know, our honey hole for all the good picks. Everybody loves the K&L picks, and the K&L picks come from David. So we're super excited to do this tasting. We appreciate the honor of you joining us today. Letting us pick your brain, telling us about your method. It's really impressive that you are picking not just the whiskeys, but all the spirits that come in. So it's amazing, daunting, impressive. You also write the tasting notes for it. And finding the 2 hours to spend with us is really a treat. So thank you so much for being here tonight. We have a spectacular lineup that when you and I first talked, we specifically picked these bottles as something special, something that you're excited about, and something that we can all purchase if we love. Being as how popular K&L is, not the case anymore in that last part.
Yeah, I think I've got 2 of these 6 maybe available, but better to taste, better to have loved and lost, as they say.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah,
I'm
all that
sure
said, we're super
many
excited.
of these people have already grabbed here, so I know a lot of you have. So at least you'll know what you've got in the vault there, hopefully.
Absolutely. So we're tasting 6 different expressions. You want to tell us again what order we're going to go in, and then I'll put it in the chat.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're going to start with the malts, the Old Pulteney. Then we're going to move on to the Bunnahabhain, which is a little bit of a oddball one just to go next, but I think it'll be a nice break. Then into the Clynelish, and finish the malts with the Glendronach Hart Brothers, and then the Russells, and finish the whole night with a bit of Armagnac, which I don't have the samples. Unfortunately, they're not here yet, but I do remember all these whiskeys quite well. They're relatively fresh, so certainly I am excited to hear what you guys think of them. Obviously, I like them. That's why I bought them. But
I was gonna say, this is when I was looking at this lineup, I tip of the hat to you when I said I want to go very broad and interesting and wide. It's so rare to find an official bottling of a single cask, and then a bunch of independent bottlers, and out of 4 malts, none of them repeat a bottler. That's like a crazy array.
yeah, it's we're in a very lucky position, and you pointed out that I pick all the spirits at K&L. Of course, it's not a one-man show. I've always had a partner. Used to be David Driscoll. Some of you guys know that. And we built the program together, really convincing the owners at K&L, luckily, who had experience sending buyers to different regions in Europe and all over the world to buy wine. But when we started 12 13 14 years ago now, 13 14 years ago now, they weren't doing that for spirits. We hadn't bought 1 cask of anything really at the time. And after selecting samples, and being successful from what importers offered us, we realized that all we were getting was what the importer wanted to sell us. So that meant that our bottlers in Scotland had hundreds, if not thousands, of casks that were very much available, but never made it in front of us. And surely we couldn't, go around the importer and ask them, hey, what samples can we have? But once you're in the warehouse looking at the barrels, they can't really stop you. So that was sort of the idea. And of course, at the time, there were significant distillers willing to bottle single barrels. Brooklotti, Springbank, various others, Glenfarclas, some of the real heavy hitters. And so those first few years, if you were lucky enough to be shopping at K&L, were definitely pretty special. Um, and as it developed, we realized we really didn't need the importers at all, and that sort of became more my focus. My job was all the logistics of getting the casks here and writing them up and selecting them and what have you. It's obviously been a challenge the last few years not being able to go out there, but it's it's a relationship business. So the more you show up, the more you get access to, pay your bills on time. That really helps, and that's been sort of the motto. And it's worked well for us. So is everybody already poured the old Pulteney?
As we say that, I just checked the tracking, and your samples should be in your mailbox as of 7:07.
Ah,
I don't know if you
well,
want to run out real quick and grab them, or if you have someone that can do it for you, but just letting you know they're here. So if you want to taste with
yeah,
us, you
might
can.
as well, if you guys don't mind
I'll
losing me for
pause it.
about
Yeah,
two
for
minutes.
sure.
Yeah, I'm
And magically, David has all the samples. Ta-da!
voila. So yeah, Pulteney, one of the few distillers who's still, willing. Well, now they didn't used to sell us casks. Now they're into selling us casks. Um, we've done a few with them. This is one of the better ones I've had, I thought. Same ownership as Bow Blair, an interesting company. So this year, we didn't get a huge amount of choice with these. Of course, usually they send us a bunch of samples. This year they sent us this cask or a 32-year-old sherry Bow Blair, which was spectacularly good, but they thought it should retail for $800. So the choice was easy. And I think ultimately, you know, this is such an obviously wonderful style. I mean, Pulteney in general is underappreciated and I think undervalued in some sense, although the prices are going up like everything. Um, but cast strength, 15-year-old first fill bourbon checks all the boxes. This one loves water, by the way. If you're not adding water, I would consider that anywhere from a couple drops to even more. I'm a big proponent, especially on younger whiskeys, of giving them their due, which in my opinion is, a nice splash of spring water. So highly recommend that here, but of course it's always a taste. And I've actually never been up to that distillery. It's very, very far out of the way. But I did go to Bow Blair to pick out our first cask with them, and they're an interesting company. They're pretty old school, owned by I believe a Thai beverage company. A little bit bummed that they moved away from the vintage Bow Blair stuff. Not that it's changed their sales. Nobody cares about Blair still. I don't know if you guys do, but hard for us to sell. There's some interest in it. And Pulteney, we just rock with it. 12, 15, 18. People love those whiskeys and they're really starting to make a name for themselves. So it was kind of a no-brainer for us. What do you guys dig this guy?
So this one is spectacular, and the bourbon is clearly there, the bourbon cask. But I will
Yeah.
say, I just cracked a bottle of an IB Bow Blair, IB Pulteney that you have, the 10-year-old. Totally different. That one tastes like, smells like gin. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's a bit of a controversial one. That's was a bit piney, that one. The thing about picking whiskeys, I don't remember if I did I take the whole cask of that Pulteney the 10-year from Hart. It was the Hart brothers, right? That you had?
Believe so.
Yeah. You know, we're buying for so many different tastes. So, sometimes I come across a barrel and I'm like, this is just weird enough that, it could be fun to sell. they can't all be bangers. They can't all be sherry, Glendronach, what have you. And Scotch in particular is such a diverse category that you sometimes get weird ones like that, buddy. That piney little Pulteney, which I've seen some really negative reviews on Reddit for, but it is what it is. You can't make everybody happy. Regularly, picking cats. I remember a very controversial old particular Glengoyne in PX. And literally within the same day, I had someone come in, return a bottle, tell us that we were crazy people, that we shouldn't be selling this swill, and that we were bad at our jobs. And I'm not even joking. Not even an hour later, somebody came in and was like, "This is the best bottle I've ever had. I want cases of it. You know, how can I get more?" And so, that's what I'm dealing with. So we can't ever. I surely don't expect everybody to like every cask I buy. Um, I like every cask I buy. I don't love every cask I buy. I like every cask and think that, it's really, really easy to tell good whiskey from actually bad whiskey, but there's not a whole lot of bad whiskey out there any longer. There used to be 10 years ago, even there's a lot more bad whiskey. But consistency is up, and prices are up too. So we're always struggling to keep it value driven. We want people to feel like they're getting they're getting their money's worth. And I think if you were buying Scotch 20 years ago, IB was, the place where that made so much sense. Nowadays, I have trouble seeing the value in all the 10-year-old, maybe very high quality casks, but 10-year-old 150, 200 single malts out there. Like, I get that it's expensive to do these sorts of things, but I don't know. It's difficult for me to appreciate that. It's one thing if it's Ardbeg or Springbank or something like that that is actually hard to get. But 10-year-old Benrinnes for 150 or $200, like, that's tough, and it's tough to sell. We have an excellent signatory Benrinnes on the shelf right now. It's $120. It's 12 years old. I think it's worth the money, but there aren't a lot of people jumping at it. Some guys, I don't know. Some guys are probably right. It's a very, very good whiskey, but it doesn't fly out the way that 12-year-old Glendronach for $150 does. So it's a complicated game we're playing. But I think I've always focused on and providing value. And when I taste a cask, my main goal is balance. That's the word I'm thinking of when I'm selecting a barrel. And I really want to offer things that I can honestly say I'll enjoy, even if they're not all A+ whiskeys. It's impossible, but I think this is pretty close to as good as a sherry Highland single malt can get. Though I'm not sherry bourbon barrel.
So I guess that's always the question when people ask about picking barrels, especially for a store, is do you pick a barrel? You walk in and do you think this is something that people will like, or do you think I love it and people like my palate, so they'll trust me?
I don't think about people. I think about my palate, and how I feel about the whiskey. I generally think I have pretty good taste. So, that's sort of, you need to have confidence when you do this. Like, you need to believe that you know what you're doing. Obviously, there are whiskeys that I pick that in the future, I mean, and a lot of what we do is political as well. Like, there are occasions when I pick whiskeys and I have to bottle something, and I have, you won't see a nice big glowing review at the end of the note because, maybe we have to sell it in order to get this other thing. And that's just the way this industry works. Like we got to support some things that aren't always, you know, we get nowhere if we told Campari, oh, we're not stocking Campari anymore. Like, you think I'm going to get Russell's Reserve barrels? No, like to you need to play the game, right? So yeah, it's complicated. Like there are a lot of things that go into it, but you know, in a general sense, I'm looking for something that I like and want to drink. I also have a very diverse palate. I don't have a particular type of whiskey that I like over one other. Um, I love sherry malts. I love old hogsheads. I love first fill bourbon. I love heavy Peters. I love all sorts of things. You know, the things I'm, not super into, you know, fresh first fill wine casks. I've had very few single malts in first fill wine that really worked. Couple things, but difficult to find that mainly because I think they tend to throw off flavors, flawed flavors. I also come from a wine background. Wine's my first love, so a huge amount of it is on the nose for me. The nose is so important, such a huge part of how we experience taste anyway. um but I am always thinking about, oh, is this salt free, is this reductive, is this, you know
What is reductive?
reduction uh is a wine term that has to do with really it's sulfur sort of. Reduction is um eh, when you make wine, you have to make some choices about how you're going to make it. If your certain grapes are more susceptible than others to this issue, but if you're not spending a lot of time oxygenating it, you can have these sort of free sulfur molecules that get trapped in the wine. If you've ever opened a bottle of Syrah and found that it felt a bit not sulfury, but like a little bit maybe farty, which is not a pretty term. Usually, you throw it in the decanter for an hour and it blows off. And I often find in wine casks, you can have some of those negative flavors imparted on the malt. I also don't. I've rarely seen. There are a couple of exceptions, but for single malt, virgin oak and malt don't work the way new charred oak works for bourbon, and there's some good research as to why that is. But I think when you're talking pot stills, you really you know have to be careful with new oak. If you look at something like cognac, which is a pot distilled product, their whole business is around getting the oak flavor in there without over oaking it. And I contend, I don't know, and maybe someone can prove me wrong here, but I can't think of one great, well, maybe one or two great pot distilled bourbons in the world. Um, Truly pot distilled bourbons. A lot of people like to say they're on pots, or you look at like with the Willet Distillery, it has a pot still, doesn't it? No, it doesn't at all. That's not the case. It is not pot distilled. It is traditionally distilled in a bourbon still, which is a continuous still. So continuous still, of course, is key to bourbon manufacturing, and I think really really important for new oak. You need those higher, because with a continuous still, you don't you don't cut the product. So you're keeping all of the heads in the finished product. The only thing you cut are the tails with left over in the still when you stop the run. And I think those higher alcohols, those higher level alcohols are really, really important. We'll see that with the Armagnac at the end, which is 32 years in new oak. You think, oh, it's a brandy, it's pot stills. Not at all, column stills. So, which is why I think Armagnac works better in new oak for long term than cognac does, because you've got a more complex spirit. It's complicated. I don't know if anybody wants to delve deeper. I mean, we obviously assume pot stills are more flavorful because they're single batch, but of course, the way they run a column still in Armagnac, you're going to get a much more intensely flavored spirit, new make spirit than you would a refined, super elegant cognac, and that's going
Isn't,
to stay.
sorry to interrupt, isn't Armagnac typically distilled twice, versus cognac typically distilled 3 times?
No, that's not accurate.
Okay.
Armagnac is almost exclusively distilled once, single distilled in a column alembic style column still. So it's a little bit different setup than you'd see for bourbon. Whereas cognac is distilled twice. Cognac and Scotch are very similar in terms of the distillation. They ferment a product, they put it in the pot, they heat it up. There are a couple of little things that are different, but in general, it's the same idea. Armagnac and bourbon are really kind of more closely related, although the bourbon still is totally different. And for a couple of reasons I can go into when we talk about the bourbon. But yeah, Armagnac is unusual in that it typically itinerant distillers who are doing the distillation have this old school style column still, so it's only 4 or 5 plates, and they heat instead of heating steam and injecting it into the still like you would for an industrial column still in a rum distillery or a vodka distillery or something like that. They heat the wine, and so it's the steam of the wine that's doing the distillation, which creates a very flavorful spirit at the end. And it comes right off the still at 55 to 60% alcohol, which is different in relation to, say, something like bourbon, which uses steam, and then when bourbon passes over the column, then it goes into what's called a doubler or a thumper, which very much looks like a pot still. Which is what you see if you go to Willet. You see that beautiful pot still that they made the bottle out of, but it's actually not a pot still because it's continuous, and generally what you have in there is water. So they put the steam, or they reduce the column still, and then they condense the spirit from the column still in beer in the beer still, and that gets pumped into water in the doubler, which continuously distills. And so they're lowering the proof but distilling at the same time, so it's really more like another column on the still than it is like a pot still, which is a distinction that's difficult to appreciate, but it is very, very different. So anyway, pot still doesn't equal good and column still equal bad. Certain products do better on pot stills than others, and I think in particular, with some exceptions, of course, rye whiskey is its own beast, and I think there are a lot of great pot distilled rye whiskeys out there that go into new oak. Part of that is the enzymatic complexity of the rye grain itself, the proteins and all the stuff that's going in there. So it's able to stand up to that wood. Anyway, back to the malt at hand. I've sort of gone off track here. Is everybody done with that? Should we move on to number 2? I don't know.
Everybody's loving it.
I'm glad they're enjoying it. Any questions so far? Oh, I see the chat here. Wait, are we drinking the Pulteney? Yes, Stuart, we are drinking the Pulteney. There is the lineup. Moving on to Bunnahabhain. Bunnahabhain, what a fabulous distillery this is. You guys probably know it. A lot of ups and downs with this distillery. Been trying to convince them to sell us an OB for about 10 years, but they seem not to be interested. This is a cask. You guys know Signatory probably. This has been one of our most important relationships. One of the few independent bottlers that we're not buying directly, single cask. So this goes through normal channels, which is very unusual for us. Part of how we offer such great prices is that we're buying directly from the bottler. And in this case, it goes through 2 other people before it gets to us, which is why, in a general sense, although Signatory is a premium brand even in Europe, where they don't have distribution tiers the way we do. That's why it's so much more expensive than some of the other independently bottled stuff that we sell. I think the whiskeys for sure stand up to the price and deserve the premium. They're extremely careful about wood selection, barrel selection. They do a huge amount of tasting and quality control, and and the other thing about it is the most magical warehouses. Like, they're so great. So if you can ever get into the warehouses at Edward, if you're in Pitlochry, I highly recommend it, because it's just story upon story of these beautiful dunnage warehouses, and you just open up and I know exactly where their last barrel of Port Ellen is, in the back corner, and I covet it desperately. But they have a few other old gems, and it's a wonderful experience, because very rarely do we get to go into a warehouse and see a series of barrels, right? And then say, okay, can we taste all 10 of these Ben Nevises or all 10 of these Glenrothies, and really pick. Usually, maybe you're lucky in a warehouse to see two or 3 barrels that are the same, and then you can choose between those. But at Signatory, they're calling down the whiskeys from the warehouse. Does everybody know how Scotch bottlers sort of work in a general sense? Is that pretty
We
common
never
knowledge?
talked about it, but if you want to go over it, yeah. And then the question,
Yeah,
the other question I had for you was,
Sorry, go
how
ahead.
many barrels do you taste in a trip? If you're pulling 10 barrels of one distillery, I mean, that's your palate's gonna blow out at some point, no?
No, we don't make those calls. We don't make the calls about what we're gonna buy in the warehouse like that. Never, 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 never. You can never make.
Okay.
There are occasionally moments where I don't even need to taste the whiskey, and I know we're gonna want it for various reasons. I can't. I've never said no to a Clynelish. I buy every Clynelish. You got one? I'll buy it. I don't care. Whatever it is, it's Clynelish. I'm buying it. Doesn't matter. I haven't had a bad one. I mean, I can't think of the last bad Clynelish I've had. Certainly not an IB Clynelish that I've had. Maybe, but 10 years ago. Of course, I do taste them. Obviously, if they're flawed, we can't sell it. But in the warehouse, it's very, 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 very hard to distinguish between good and great whiskey. One, because the environment. 2, it's usually freezing as hell, so you're trying to warm the whiskeys up. Everything kind of tastes good in the warehouse, and everything kind of tastes like the warehouse as well, because you're there and it's so warehousey. Dunnage warehouses are open ground. There's mold everywhere on the walls. There's refuse and other things all over the place, and it's not the best environment to make judgment calls. It's easy to taste if you're tasting multiple things in a row, to be like, okay, that one is got more going on here, and so we'll take that one and maybe that other one, and then we take the samples back with us. We warm them up. We let them sit a day or two in the hotel room, and then we either take them home with us and spend some time in our home environment with them. Usually we make the call before we leave, so we can either drink the samples, you don't have to lug it all the way back. But yeah, we wouldn't generally in Scotland make the call in the warehouse. So yeah, I find, you know, we're of course tasting professionally, and so again, a huge amount of it is on the nose. You cannot evaluate a whiskey without swallowing some of it. But what I generally recommend, and I actually recommend people do this at home when they're enjoying whiskey, is instead of starting with a nice big gulp or what have you, is what I'm really focused on to evaluate whiskey is taking the littlest amount I can into my mouth to fully cover the palate all the way back to the back of the bottom of the throat. I don't want to be swallowing anything, right? So I'm experiencing it, but I'm not getting the alcohol. I'm not drinking the alcohol for sure, because we have 500 samples a taste and I have to drive. And so that I feel is enough for me to experience and decide, okay, this is better than that cask. And, you know, maybe we don't take any of these once we warm them up and sit in the hotel room, but at least I can distinguish between these two casks. So I rarely find that I have palate fatigue from those sorts of things. You know, sip of water in between, you know, bag of crisps or whatever, you know, you get through it. Of course, as I said, we're not making our final call based on those, you know, tasting through 50 or 60 casks in an afternoon in a warehouse. We're really making our preliminary decisions about what we feel we can sell, and then evaluating them further in a more controlled environment. So I hope that answers your question, Bernie.
Yeah, and how many cask samples would you say you go through in a warehouse? When, like, let's say you went to Pitlochry, how many cask samples would you pull?
Depends on how much time they have. You know, we used to buy more from Signatory when the prices were lower. We could sell more. If I'm in the warehouse, I'm not super happy if I haven't tried 30 or 40 casks before we leave.
And how many of those will you say yes to?
5.
So you're turning it, you're picky. You're not just like, oh, I'll take it.
Yeah.
You don't feel bad, because there have been brands where we've done a few barrel picks, nothing, you know, but we've done a couple, and there have been times where they like gave us 4 samples and they gave us 4 other ones, and like we said no because we felt like nothing stood out, nothing was, because I don't want to pick a barrel unless it's going to be amazing. I don't want it to just be another barrel that tastes the same like all, you know, their own stuff.
Yeah.
But I do feel
Yeah, I
bad.
think it is harder with bourbon. You know, I think it is harder with bourbon. In the end, I have to buy something, right? Because we gotta sell stuff. Like that's the name of the game. So, you know, even if there be whiskeys, maybe I can hammer them on the price later, complain about, oh, you didn't give us anything great this year, and they go, oh, okay, you can have 10% off or whatever it is. So it's always, you know, I can't come home with nothing, right? We have to sell it. We have to have something to sell. And usually they're great. You know, I think we have a pretty good track record of buying good whiskeys for various different palates. Like again, you cannot buy, you know, I think there are certain whiskeys that we've had that everybody can agree are great. And then we have other ones that certain people like and other people don't like, and that's the way it is. Like that's how taste is. So there's that in mind. But no, I'm not so dogmatic that I have to have every whiskey we buy be A plus, because simply there aren't enough A plus whiskeys in the world. I mean, that's just, it's not realistic. The more the more B and B plus whiskeys I can buy and sell, the more A plus whiskeys they end up giving me, right? You know, so you know, it's a, you know, it's commerce. We have, you know, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. We have to buy stuff and sell it. Like that's our job. So most of the time it's pretty easy because the whiskeys we get are great. And there are a lot of great whiskeys that everybody can agree are great that we still can't sell, right? And I don't think we've had, maybe one or two American craft whiskeys that haven't been closed out in our system in the last 5 years. Like every single one gets closed out. People talk big, how much they love craft whiskey, but nobody cares like that.
Closed
We
out as in,
continue.
like, they're done, they're out of business, or?
No, if you see on our Insider's Advantage where you see, was $59.99 now 43, our system is such that if the product doesn't sell,
Well, you mean, yeah, it goes on clearance, close out, yeah.
the computer closes it out. I don't make that decision. Someone, there's an algorithm that says this isn't working. Like, let's get our money back. So that's shouldn't be surprise anybody. And there's very, very little interest. I can sell 30 bottles or 50 bottles of anything, because we have a core group of people who are interested in that stuff. But American craft whiskey is extremely difficult to sell. And we've significantly cut back on what we can buy because we simply can't sell it. There are a couple of exceptions. We have an excellent Corbin Cash right now that's 6-year, might be sold out now. The 6-year rye, that's killer, that sold through. There's that beautiful Dry Fly Irish style whiskey that's done well. But also, craft whiskey is expensive, right? So and I think, I don't know how the promise of craft whiskey 10 years ago was, in 10 years it's going to be so good, taste it now. Yeah, that's because it's young. But we keep going back to the spat and it tastes just like it did 10 years ago. So I think there's there's a big disconnect in quality between what most craft guys can do and what they charge and what Kentucky is doing, right? So consumers are not dumb. They know that. And that's why everybody wants bourbon, right? Kentucky bourbon.
So for those B and B plus whiskeys, are there any words you may use in your review that may be different than, say, those A plus whiskey reviews that you write?
No, not necessarily, because I still love the B whiskeys. Like, the B whiskeys are going to be like the 12-year-old, refill sherry for $50, right? Like, that's if you add the value in, I think generally they're all A whiskeys if you consider the cost, right? If they're blind with no cost, sure, it may be a B, maybe it's a B plus. But when you factor in the value proposition, I don't think any of them should be discounted in any way. You're not going to get an A plus 18-year-old sherry monster bomb for $50. Like, it's just not going to happen. But we need $50 whiskey to sell, and we need good $50 whiskey to sell. And if that means it's going to be, a 12-year-old a thrust for $55, it's perfectly delicious. That's what it's going to be. Like, there's no reason not to drink and buy that. Like,
I very much appreciate your $50 cask strength single casks. That's
Yeah,
usually,
I
like,
mean,
financially, that's
those
my
are
sweet spot.
totally. And some of those are A whiskeys and for $50. Sometimes we get lucky. And sometimes, I'm like for people who drink whiskey, right? Like, I want people to enjoy it and I want people to love it. And of course there's collectors and there's, certainly there are some whiskeys here that are highly collectible and will be worth a lot of money one day. Much more than we charge for them, likely. But I'm buying for people who drink, and that means that I have to, everything I do is with the cost in mind. And that's extremely important to me. So I wanted to provide values is very, very important for me.
So
Um,
David, how do you choose something like rites of passage or Dramful? Have you had those before, or you just took a flyer on them?
so the rites of passage aren't a direct buy at all. It was like the guy who picked them out had a tiny allocation for California. We did taste
Yeah,
them; they were very, very good. But it's not like they're K&L exclusives.
they're all great. They're all really
Yeah,
good. I
the
bought them all
quality's
directly
excellent.
from,
The
but I
quality is
bought
excellent.
more from you guys.
Goody. Yeah, they
Particularly the Orkney is really, really good.
which
It's
is
like a
hard to find.
peated Longmore.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I actually haven't tasted them yet. It was Andrew, my partner up north, who put that deal together simply because I was out of town when the samples came through. So yeah, that's a little different. The other example you asked about was the Dramful. That's
Dramful.
also an Andrew Whiteley original. He does get samples for some of those. Again, these are not K&L exclusive casks, so it's a little bit more like, even though we're importing those directly, it's a little bit more like standard. We're getting like 30 bottles of this or that. Huh, that must be my ghost. Oliver, you little sneaky.
The ghost has a name.
Ghost has a name. And so someone's asking, what does K&L stand for, Todd? It stands for Kay and Linda, the founders' wives' names. Yeah, those Dramfuls, we're basically, they're very, very expensive. I think in general the quality is excellent. We're huge. If you didn't know it, Jim McEwen fans, he's like one of my favorite people in the whole world. And he's on board with them, so we're on board, right? But it's less like we're going there, picking the cask, and then making decisions. They're like, "Oh, you're going to sell us 30 bottles of that? Great, whatever." I'm sure it's lovely, and then we get the samples after the fact. So that's a little bit different than our DI stuff, and actually, Dramful has a sort of like a New York person who's consolidating it for us. So that's part of why they're expensive, because there is a margin, one less margin than something like Signatory, but so they're not. I mean, they would be more expensive if they came through normal channels, but it's a little bit different from our DI true direct import, which are, the bottlers we're working with right now are Hunter Lang, Douglas Lang, Hart Brothers, and Thompson Brothers, which we call Redacted Brothers. Those are the four main guys, and we're slowly building more relationships. I think we have something coming from Firkin, which is direct from Scotland, which is a small bottler. And we've worked with.
Would you say
Sorry?
the market is kind of overrun with independent bottlers at this point? Seems like there's a lot.
Yeah, what I think is really a problem is that they're all fighting for there's no whiskey here, right? The big guys are tightening the strings and the prices are going up. And part of the promise of the IB thing is that they're going to give you the cask strength single barrel thing at an affordable price. And I think a lot of them have decided, oh, well, this is special or different, so we don't have to worry about the price any longer. And certain things that works for, certain things people go crazy for, but yeah, I don't see that. If you don't provide value for your customers, it's just not a winning proposition. Of course, there's a lot of money in Scotch, so there are a lot of people who are willing to spend money. You guys are some of them, so but I'm sure every time you open a mediocre $200 bottle, you think, hey, I could have bought a mediocre $50 bottle, like, right? That's what I think. So if I'm spending $200 or $300, it better be freaking excellent. It's my opinion, but And so yeah, as we go higher up, we're we're very 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 careful. I think generally with making sure that we're providing really stellar stuff. So we're on the Buna, so I haven't talked about this whiskey at all. That's a heavily sherried Bunnahabhain, famous whiskey on the north coast of Islay, famous for being not so peaty, but it loves sherry. You still get kind of that salinity behind all that sherry nuttiness. And this is quite high alcohol as well. This is 64 and change, so heads up there. Oh yeah, that's good. Stewart rated the Orkney 92, the Buna 90, the Williamson 90, the Monocmore was a surprise. Without water 86, with water 90. Monocmore can be very good. I'm glad those rites of passage were well regarded.
It's interesting because sometimes when you add water, it highlights or whatever is totally different whiskey with water.
Yeah.
Fantastic with water.
I don't love every whiskey with water, but I don't drink any whiskeys without at least trying them with water. I think it is you owe it to the whiskey to give it a shot with a splash of water in it, because obviously it can sometimes change it significantly, and sometimes it doesn't do anything, which is crazy as well. Like sometimes it's the exact same flavor, so it's obviously quite alive. So in any case, I like this Buna. It loves water too.
Do you know which sherry cask this Buna's from?
What type of sherry?
Yeah.
It's almost certainly an Oloroso sherry. The whole sherry barrel thing in Scotland is kind of it's I don't want to say it's fake. It's not fake. It's real. But what we call a sherry barrel is not the same as what it was 30 or 40 years ago. And I think with that in mind, that doesn't mean they're lower quality, but the distinction, if it's not Oloroso, they're almost always going to make sure you know about it, because if it's PX or something like that, there's gonna be a premium on it. So it's pretty rare these days for us to see whiskeys that are aged in non-Oloroso sherry without it being mentioned on the bottle. We just don't have, particularly with young whiskeys, they've got a pretty standardized system of seasoned sherry butts that are almost always American oak. This could be European oak. Those I think are the real distinctions between sherry casks today, are whether it's American. Only a tiny fraction of the sherry is aged in European oak, and for that reason, it's very distinguishable. This very well could be European oak here.
It's not really red enough to be European oak, the color.
Yeah, I don't know. Looks a little red to me, but it's likely not European oak. And because what is 4 or 5% of all sherry goes into European oak, and the majority of that stays in the bodegas. So unless someone is specifically paying for that, you're probably not getting European oak. There's new, Highland Parks that are 10, 12-year-old for $200+ are in European oak sherry, and you can really taste it. The European oak throws much more tannin, of course, and a different color, like was noted.
Or Tamdu.
Yeah, there are a couple of people who are, using it regularly, but smells pretty good. Oh yeah. Okay. That's a chocolatey Bunnahabhain. Now we said we're going to the Clynelish, right? So this is Gordon MacPhail. I didn't talk really about how the bottling, how the Scotch industry works, which I think is a really interesting part of what we do. Scotch is very unique in the sense that all the big companies trade. They trade between each other. They buy casks and parcels with each other, and use those various apparatus to create their blends based on recipes that are changing, but pretty consistent throughout the years. And that means that, of course, you have a whole sort of industry below the big guys of blenders and traders and brokers in Scotch. And so the general way that Scotch is acquired in the marketplace is a broker. There's about 5 or 6 main brokers, gets a list from an owner, usually a big company, but sometimes a private individual. There's a lot of private ownership of casks in Scotland as investments or inheritance or what have you. And then that list goes out, and you usually don't get to go picky choosy with which barrels you want from the list. Like you can, and there are different levels of opaqueness, and the more opaque that a batch will be, the less you're going to pay for it generally. So you could buy a batch of whiskeys and end up with nothing that's worth putting in the bottle, right? So so that's basically how it goes. And someone like Signatory pretty meticulously goes through these batches, and what you're looking for in a general sense is, and this is basically what I'm telling my suppliers is first and second fill, like that's where it's at. Like unless it's old, third, fourth, fifth fill is rare to find really high quality stuff, unless it's from a great distillery or it's old or what have you. And so that's the general way things work. Gordon MacPhail, of course, is very, very different. And some of my other suppliers have started to rely more on filling contracts, like Douglas Lang and Hunter Lang have a number of high quality filling contracts, which is where we're getting things like single cask Talisker and what have you that they're using for blends, and over the years have amended their contracts with Diageo or whoever may be the owner of the distillery to allow the sale of those as single cask. Gordon MacPhail is different. If you guys don't know about these guys, these are probably the oldest bottler of whiskey left in Scotland, and they were the original bottlers of a huge number of the best known distillers: Glenlivet, Macallan, across the board, Stapa, everybody, Pulteney. They all have labels that were originally trademarked by Gordon MacPhail. And that means when Pernod Ricard bought Glenlivet, they went straight for Gordon MacPhail and said, hey, you can't use that label anymore. That's our original label. And Gordon MacPhail, unfortunately, has had the trademark for 200 years and can use the label. And a number of other, traditional distillery labels, because they were the bottler for all these guys, and you couldn't get the whiskeys unless you were buying them from Gordon MacPhail 100 years ago. So they've retained those filling contracts. They have the most diverse selection of whiskeys in Scotland. I've heard rumors of over 195 distilleries, which is 70 more than exist right now. So, maybe 50 more now with all the little ones, but they have quite a diverse selection. Obviously, some super, super, super old whiskeys. If you've seen their sort of luxury lines, are these ridiculous.
Gordon MacPhail is the bottler for a lot of the kind of under the radar Diageo brands as well, right? Like the Ewins and the Linkwoods. Those are all, I think, old Gordon MacPhail labels, no? Or they were, I guess, originally.
They have, yeah, they were the original bottlers for Linkwood. I don't think about Value, and there's the flora and fauna bottling lines that are the Diageo UK only or Europe only lines, which are sort of an independent style bottling of those distilleries. But yeah, Gordon MacPhail is not doing those, but they do these distillery labels like the ones we mentioned: Linkwood, Longmorn, Mortlock, Scapa, Macallan, what they call it, the Spain Malt Macallan, Glenlivet, just a huge host of distillery labels. And yeah, because they were the original bottlers. Nobody else was crazy enough to bottle this stuff 100 years ago. And you had to go to their grocery, their store in Elgin to get it, basically. And so that means they have access to incredible things. The other thing that they're doing is they are the ones who decide what barrels go up there. So they're procuring the barrels, sending them to the distillery from this date to this date. The distillery fills for Gordon MacPhail, and then the whiskeys go directly back to the warehouse. So they're a little different, is that you're not having that terroir of the distillery warehouses. But to be perfectly honest, you know, there hasn't been any Caol Ila aged on Islay in 40 plus years, probably 30 years, maybe. So there is obviously something to be said for aging in place, but it's not the key factor to quality of a single malt or to character for that matter, because Caol Ila is very, very distinctive, but it's all, and very oceany for that matter, but it's all aged in mainland Scotland at the main Diageo facility. So Gordon MacPhail is a little different, so that's why you get these high quality. This is refill, so second fill, and great color for a second fill barrel here. This is likely European oak. What's great about a Gordon MacPhail refill barrel, something like this, which is 13 years old, was filled whatever in 2010, maybe. And if you think about that barrel, likely it maybe had whiskeys that were distilled 30 or 40 years before that, because Gordon MacPhail was doing that. So so this barrel maybe was brought to Scotland in the 60s or 70s, and likely was in a bodega in Jerez for decades, maybe a century before that. So this might be from wood from a tree that was felled 150 years ago. And that's why refill sherry oftentimes. I had a really weird experience once with George Grant at Glenfarclas. I was trying to, this is a few years, 2019, trying to find a 30-year-old. We're going to do a 2-barrel blend, 30-year-old 89 Glenfarclas. And I was like, of course, George, we want the dark, the big sherry bombs. Like, let's go for first fill. So we go into this warehouse, we taste 10 whiskeys. They're all very good, but they're light. Their color is light. And I'm like, George, what's going on with this? Like, these are first fill. And, he's like, well, the sherry, each batch of sherry cask is different. And you have all this. And I was like, listen, what we really want is dark, heavy, intense, powerful sherry. He's like, oh, you want the refill then? So the second fill in 89s, the second fills in 89s were the stuff that was dumped at the distillery in 89. So you think about, the barrels that they were, maybe what they were bottling at Glenfarclas in 1989 was maybe distilled 40 years earlier or 25 years earlier. And that's what they were getting for the 1970 vintage, so you have to take that into account. And a good barrel of sherry, especially, can go 2 or 3 times like this and still give a lot of character. And of course, Clynelish loves sherry.
How is this sherry hoggy? I thought generally sherries were in butts. Was it recoopered into a smaller barrel? I thought hoggy was like a bourbon thing, or maybe I was wrong.
It isn't. It's both. So yeah, it was likely recoopered from sherry. So in modern times, they would have seasoned sherry hogsheads um, in a Jerez, so that they would have been produced there. The reason they use hogshead is because it's a more efficient size for the warehouses. It's the most efficient space that they can use. Sherry barrels are very, very heavy. They take up a lot of space, and if you can, if you can do that with less space, then that's good for business. In the case of this barrel, it's likely that this is from a period before the whole casks were brought in together, and they would have taken um, just the staves. So you would have had a lot of these, and so maybe if the cooper could say keep a barrel together and then recooper it once it gets up there, then you'd see the sherry butt there. You know, but more likely a sherry hogshead might be more appropriate or efficient, or maybe that's just what Gordon MacPhail wanted. So they ordered hoggies because it took up less space in the warehouse, basically. So it's a different market now, but yeah, there may have been these sherry staves may have come. It's not like it's not like nowadays where they leave some traveling sherry in there and they wrap the barrels and they send a whole container of barrels whole. They would have broken them down and then recoopered them all in Scotland individually.
So my understanding is not wrong. Generally, when somebody says the sherry cask, they're talking about a butt. This is the exception
That's
to the rule. They broke it
this
down
is
and
the
made it into a hoggy.
yeah, this is the exception rule, and it's kind of becoming more normal as well, partly because sherry butts are so expensive. They're so big, so it's like, if you want to sell a single barrel, that someone's got to commit to 600 plus bottles, but also simply because they're less expensive, for a distiller to buy them. So now they're ordering, and Spain is making sherry hogsheads specifically for this
Well,
industry.
also Spain's
Almost,
not really aging sherry in it anymore. They're just seasoning, passing it on, right?
yeah, they do have to, they do have to age it to the minimum, the legal minimum to call it
Which is
sherry.
what's the legal minimum?
3 years, I think.
3 years, huh? Still a long time.
Yeah, it's still a long time. I mean, not like the old days, not like 100 years, but to be perfectly honest, that idea that we used to get old sherry butts from the basement of the bodegas it was never true. So I mean, back in the day, like I'm talking Victorian era, when this style of whiskey was first developed, the reason you had sherry being used for Scotch maturation was just a matter of convenience, right? So you would, if you were in the hunting classes, as it were, the people who had estates in Scotland, you would summer there, you would order sherry by the barrel. The bodega would fill what they would call a traveling cask. So it was never a bodega sherry, but again, Victorian times is 300 years ago, right? And then that would be delivered to your manor or what have you, and you'd consume it. And when it was consumed, you'd have this empty sherry button. Well, what better thing to store single malt from the distillery down the road than this barrel of sherry? And that's why it started. Just as a matter of convenience and storage and what have you. And it turns out that they figured out pretty quick, obviously, that it tastes pretty damn good. And so, that became, a typical method of storage, but also, historically anything would have been up for grabs. And there were a lot more barrels being used for all sorts of commerce, like, Campbelltown, for instance, sort of in the pre-Pattison whiskey days, was renowned for making fishy whiskey. And that's because this was a fish capital, and the fish was stored, kippers were stored in barrels. When the barrels were empty, the whiskey went in there, and that's, you know, it had a bad reputation in that period because they were filling fish barrels with single malt. So not not that I don't want to try that. Like I don't think that I don't think that that's going to fly. But you know, you have to. It was just a different time, so it wasn't. You know, the industry wasn't as fishky. You got it. Stuart knows. So yeah, it was a different time, and what's developed now. You know, I contend, and I talk about this a lot. I think in a general sense, whiskey is better than it maybe has ever been, because they have, in some senses, homogenized it for the better, right? The inputs, you know, like the regions in Scotland are worthless, right? Doesn't mean anything because you can make any type of whiskey anywhere. Regions were similar in flavor because they shared resources, both technological, intellectual, and physical. And nowadays, you know, nobody's malting, hand malting, nobody's cutting peat, nobody's doing any of that. So those things, while they've made things more similar, likely they've made them also better in a general sense. But as you homogenize, as your goals become efficiency and consistency, you lose, of course, the high highs, you lose the low lows, but it's smooth, you know, it softens the hills and valleys. So finding a, you know, a legendary whiskey, I think is also, finding a terrible whiskey is harder these days, but finding a legendary whiskey is harder as well. What do you guys think of the clown whiskey?
The flip side of that romanticized view of the past is, you know, if you have like a bunch of Glenflaglers with no production quality control at all, some of them are just terrible. And it's not because, you know, highs and lows. It was just sometimes it would be blindingly bad and sometimes good, right?
I totally agree. No, I think, well, you know, I'm not even sure there was quality control in that respect. And that's part of why the blends became so popular, was because you could count on a Chivas 12 year to be good, you know, and that was a calling card for the whole industry, really. So all the best whiskeys, you know, one funny story I heard from a great guy, he owns a small wine merchant in Edinburgh, and he had a very under the radar but incredibly high quality independent bottler called The Bottlers. If you ever see those around, anything from The Bottlers is freaking out of control. And we sat with him, and he didn't really have the same connections he did when he was bottling those. But we kind of picked his brain about what was going on. And basically, he was friends with some guys who owned Drambuie, right? It was the Morrison Bowmore guys. And you know, Drambuie back in the day had a ton of super old rare whiskeys being blended into it, and when they were too old and rare to get blended into the liqueur, they just sat there, and there's no really, they weren't going to put them into the cheapo blends, they weren't going to put them in the Drambuie. There was no industry for getting rid of them. So the bottlers came along, was like, oh yeah, I'll buy that from you. That's delicious. And that's how we got these casks. I've heard stories of, you know, the guy who did, do you remember I don't know if you guys ever saw the Bothwell brand. Bothwell's. He did, funny
One
guy.
of the best Port Ellens I've had.
Well, he's the king of Port Ellen. That guy, he was an accountant. He got the contract somehow with his mother to bottle the Barcelona soccer team branded 50 mLs. I don't know how he figured that out. So he made his money there, and then he did like some accounting work for Diageo, and in lieu of getting paid, he took Port Ellens. And that was totally normal in Scotland 30 years ago. So there you go. Um, did that answer your question? I don't remember what the question was.
I love the story though. Man, so far these samples have been fantastic, and I love what you said earlier about there's no Klein leash that I walk away from, and I'm glad you didn't on this G&M, man. It's fantastic, especially
Yeah, it's
especially as you add, like in your comments, you talk about adding water and how it just shines. I mean that orange and caramel and like all the different flavors that come out of it are so good.
oh yeah, I'm glad you dig it. I'm just reminded that I did walk away from a Klein leash recently. Signatory had one. We ended up buying one bottle, but they wanted to sell us a barrel, and they were asking 1,500 for a 31-year-old, 44% alcohol refilled bourbon barrel, and I was like, probably really, really good, but I couldn't do it.
It's just
Um,
the right business decision. I mean,
yeah, it was bad
you're
for
like, come on.
business, man. I
You
still
get stuck
wanted it.
you get stuck sitting on that for too long. Your boss is probably not going to be too happy.
Yeah, I might have bought it if I'd been at the warehouse looking at the cask, but it was on a list and I just couldn't bring myself to do it. So
How
probably
long
for the best.
do these Klein leashes sit around for? I mean, I bought mine, I think the day it went out, and I don't think it lasted too much longer.
Yeah, people are starting to appreciate these. I think, the first barrel we did with Gordon MacPhail, for years we couldn't do anything with Gordon MacPhail. We tried and tried and tried. We'd go to the warehouse, we'd sit down with them, we'd say, okay, we want something first or second fill that we can sell for $60, and I'd like it to be Speyside or Isle or whatever it is, and they bring us these samples. They say, oh, this is perfect, and then we look at the bottles and say, great, this is awesome. Then we get back to the States and we get the pricing from the importer, and it would be like $150 wholesale. It's like, but they have this on the shelf in the shop at the exact same barrel or a sister cask for 40 pounds. Like, why is it $150 here? Like, it doesn't make sense. And they have a new importer, and for whatever reason, they're making it work for us. And so for years, we didn't do anything with Gordon MacPhail, despite my, desperate love of what they're doing. And we bought that first Klein leash. I think it was a 14-year, and people were skeptical because it was $140 or whatever. And all it takes is opening the bottle to figure out that it's pretty freaking stellar stuff. And I actually like this barrel a little bit better. It's a year younger, distilled 2 years later, but a year younger and fewer in barrel from the first one we did with them. And yeah, people, once you get them once, it's pretty easy to something like this to sell a bunch of it. So, that's it's pretty obvious stuff, and I think they're extremely well priced. I mean, I wouldn't say affordable per se, but for the quality you're getting here, they're really solid. Gordon MacPhail has got their new list out. I apparently don't sell enough Benromac, so I'm working on that. So we should all buy some Benromac if you can. And I think I'm totally out of stock, but they just raised the prices as well, like 20%, which is upsetting. But
Isn't Ben Romack it's the Speyside dram that tastes like original Speyside, so it's a peated Speyside essentially?
yeah, it's a lightly peated. I'd say medium peated Speyside. But it doesn't have that Isla kind of thing. It's very much like very balanced with lots of heather and honey and those sorts of things. So yeah, I'm a huge Benromac fan. But I'm on the list of not selling enough Benromac, so we gotta get behind it. We had a very, very good single barrel Benromac. Did anybody try that? That was
So one of our
stellar.
regulars, Kwa, says that's his favorite bottle you put out last year.
I appreciate that. It's a really, really good barrel.
Yeah,
Glad you
there's
dig it.
Told me.
there's a bunch of us that bought it. From that standpoint, we're like, oh man, we got to get on that.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
trust his opinion for sure. He's the one that reached out to us personally, like Shane, myself, Jordan, who's like, pick up this 13-year Klein leash. I'm like, no, but it's $140. He goes, I don't care. Pick it up. You're gonna love it. I'm
Yeah,
like, no,
it's
but I have $100 limit. He goes, no, go get it. Stop talking. I
Mm.
was like, all right, you're the boss.
he seems to know what he's talking about. Well, yeah, I think this is a pretty fun one to finish our. Oh no, we have the Glendronach now, right?
There's no finish in sight.
No finish. On to Glendronach. So this was a bit of a
By the
coup,
way,
of course.
all of these have had a ridiculously long finish. By the way, just keeps
Mm.
going.
Yeah, I know. I don't want it to end. This was a bit of a coup. You know, Hart Brothers is such a funny, weird little company. They're Donald Hart. He's a sweet guy. He's been around the industry forever, and he sold his company to this weird little bottler called Campbell Meyer. And they, from what I can tell, are focused almost exclusively on like Eastern Bloc countries and things like that, and a lot of low end junk, cheapo blends and just stuff like that. But like I said, you know, when you spend a lot of money on junk, you end up with a lot of people owing you favors. And so that ends up with things like this. This is the first independently bottled Glendronach we've ever seen, save for one that Duncan Taylor did for the States not too long ago, maybe 10 years ago, the 33-year-old. But it's a coup. We've never ever seen Glendronach in independent bottling. And
And you had multiple casks of Glendronach at the same time with different kinds of casks. Because I think I got the rum cask or something.
Yeah, we had a rum cask. Yeah, we had a rum cask as well.
Which I've never heard of Glendronach and rum, which is why I had to pick it up.
I think what's going on here is that he must be friends with Billy Walker, right? That's there's contemporaries. They're the same. You guys know who Billy is. He's the guy who restarted Glendronach and ended up selling it to Brown-Forman for a significant sum of money, and then buying Glenallachie. And this feels like a personal favor to me. I'm not sure why we deserved it. It was our first purchase with them, but we did spend quite a bit of money. They did promise us a second one, and unfortunately reneged on that promise earlier this year. So there is no more Glendronach sherry coming, but you can savor this one. This is good. This is good.
What about that OB Glendronach from 2-3 years ago? Are we going to see another one of those?
I don't know. Brown-Forman is so hit or miss. They gave us this. I don't now. Back in the day, Glendronach was the best stop because we could have anything, we could taste anything. The number of stupidly good whiskeys I passed up from Glendronach is outrageous. Because we thought we couldn't sell a $300, 25-year-old. 600 bottles of $300 25-year-old Glendronach dark sherry 10 years ago, right? But if we had it now, it'd be worth $1 million. So, there's a different time, and they really let us do whatever we wanted. We could have anything, and then things started to get tighter there, and they started to be get more expensive and what have you, and that's fine. And then they sold the distillery. But now when we deal with them, it's like you can have this one or that one. Like that's what we get. So we did get that beautiful, I think it was a PX sherry cask 11-year that I picked out with Rachel at the distillery, and they basically were like, yeah, we'll never do that again. That created such a disaster for them. Because when K&L gets it, then every other store in the country is like, why didn't we get one? Well, you haven't been buying Glendronach for, 30 years. But it's not as simple as that for Brown Foreman, especially when I don't buy any Jack Daniels. So that doesn't go over well. But or at least any 80 proof Jack Daniels, we buy as much of the barrel proof as they can get us.
I actually think it
Um,
was Oloroso, but it was just as beautiful.
Well, maybe it was Oloroso, yeah.
It was like an 11-year-old for like $100 or something. It wasn't
It's
crazy.
very, very well. Yeah, and it's a very, very good cast. Yeah, I think maybe they give us a choice between Oloroso and PX, and we took the Oloroso. And then the next year they offered us like a super weird Benriach. I think it's still in stock. It's like peated Benriach in Jack Daniels barrels or something like that, or rye barrel. No, it's rye. And it's interesting, but it's one of those things. It's political. Like I can't say no to have to say yes to it. Like, so it is what it is. But yeah, hopefully next year they'll have something else for us. They didn't have anything this year. So voila. What do you guys think of the Glendronach? It's pretty killer, huh?
That's fantastic. How would you say this compares to like the Glendronach cast strength?
I don't know. I haven't had the new release, but I assume it's in a similar style. Have you guys had? You're talking about the new cast strength Glendronach 11-year?
Yeah,
I mean
correct.
the number 11.
Number
I
11.
haven't
Yeah.
had it. I haven't had it yet. You know,
Okay.
we we used to like demand to get samples of everything before we taste it. Now they're like, you're allocated 6 bottles of Glendronach cast strength. I'm like, I guess we're gonna take it. Like, are you gonna open a bottle? Of course not. Like, I'm not gonna open a bottle when we have only 6 of them, or 12 of them, or whatever it is. I can't imagine it's better than this, right? Could it be? I don't know. Anybody tried it?
In my humble opinion, this is better than that cast strength.
Shane, you better
It's
jump
pretty-
on it. There's
Not as good
a
as Grandeur,
whole
but
2 in there available on the K&L website.
Which one?
The Glendronach cast strength batch 2. I'm looking at it right now. There's 2
Oh,
available.
really? Great.
but
Good
this is
stuff.
better than that for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, it must be.
I would definitely think so.
And those are, I think that's, part of that is Rachel is very good at blending for like whiskey that everybody is going to love. You know what I mean? Like, it's very overt and it's very approachable style, and that's very much what she's after. And I appreciate that from a commercial standpoint. But it's difficult to do that and still, beat something as sort of singular as this barrel. And I don't know. This is this could be an OB. I mean, you don't really see Glendronach outside of their system. So I don't really have context for it, but it's damn good. Yeah, that was a good cask.
This is very, very big and bold. And I mean, I was just thinking, I think bourbon drinkers who like the bold bourbon flavors don't like scotches because they're too subtle. I feel like this would be a great scotch for them to try because it's sort of a slap you in your face, with all the
No doubt.
with the bold flavors. Yeah.
When Glendronach used to be like that was their thing. Like they were big in your face whiskeys, and they've toned it back. The single cask, what they did which was really smart when they bought the distillery, is they meticulously went through all the old stocks, and they took anything that was low fill, and they dumped those old whiskeys into fresh sherry, and then they aged them for another 10 years. And then they'd sell them as like 18-year-old sherry butts, but they probably only spent 8 years in the sherry. I remember buying a barrel and being like, we bought a 22-year-old, or I forget which one. I can look it up on the site there. It was a 20-year-old or something. Let's see if I can find it. And when it was delivered, I couldn't believe how many bottles we had. It was something like 700 bottles. We were so worried we wouldn't get through it. And then I started to think it's supposed to evaporate like 2% a year. This is an 18-year-old whiskey, and this is the fullest sherry butt I've ever seen. There's no way that this could be aged for 18 years in Scotland and be this full. And I took it back to GlenDronach. I was like, what is going on with this? Like, why is this so full? How did you do this? And they eventually had to admit that indeed, at some unrecorded period in the past, they had consolidated casks into this sherry butt, which didn't prevent it from being incredibly delicious, but it did explain sort of why there was so much good heavily sherry GlenDronach when 10 years earlier GlenDronach was not well known for quality.
So how are we supposed to tell if something has been re-racked or put in a marrying vessel or put into like a glass vessel like that single cask nation that mysteriously had 2 or 3 years that disappeared off of it? I mean, how are we supposed to tell that? How are you supposed to tell that?
Well, you're not. There's no way to tell. And to be perfectly honest, it's not industry standard. Like that's not, I think GlenDronach smartly took an opportunity because they had good old stocks, but none of them had, oh my God, there's an Arsenal fan. Ken, oh, it's Ken. What a terrible week we had. Anyway, that was a way to take these old blending whiskeys that were never intended to be prime time and to make them good again. And they're, most of the bad whiskey in Scotland over the last 20 or 30 years isn't because the spirit was bad. It's because the wood was bad. And so if your plan is to marry them and hold them for another 8 or 10 years, maybe it'd be nice if you tell people, but that's a hard story to tell. So I think it's pretty rare. Single Cask Nation is pretty open with what they're doing. So, they'll tell you what they have. But I don't think it benefits a brand like GlenDronach to explain that to the average customer. Not to mention I think some people would be upset, right? Oh, I wanted single cask and this isn't true single cask. There are no rules about that. I mean, once they go into a barrel, you can call it anything you want. It's one single barrel. Voila. There are no rules about that. Just like in Kentucky, you can call something cask strength that is blatantly not cask strength. So there are things about this industry that are complicated and opaque, and that's just the way it is. I don't have a good answer for you, unfortunately. But it is rare, unusual, to say the least. A good indication is if something's old and the single barrel is full, something happened, right? It does evaporate. I mean, at least some. Even in the driest warehouse in Scotland, you have some evaporating, right? So, yeah, bourbon now, huh?
I want to add to it that so far in terms of tasting order, I think you've nailed it. Like it's worked out very well as far as the direction you went with that. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I was a little concerned about the Bunnahabhain being up front there, but I think it worked out. It's so distinctive and different from these others. It was a nice progression. I'm glad you appreciated it. We'll see how the bourbon does after that. I think I usually like bourbon after Scotch, so it should be okay. So Kentucky's obviously a very different situation for us than. Ooh, someone like the Stuart like the Boonhaven, huh? Than Scotland. You know, in Scotland we can go in there and make new relationships and buy casks based on our own, you know, idea of what we want. And in Kentucky, we're although 10 years ago I could go to Kentucky and buy whatever the hell we wanted, and I passed it on so many things, so many old Willets that I shouldn't have, and other things. You know, now we're in a very, very closed system. One of the best places to taste is Wild Turkey, and that's because don't they don't take you into a little cozy little cottage and room. You know, you go into the warehouse, hopefully with one of the Russells. If not, you know, with Jimmy's secretary, who's a badass. And you know, you take a hammer, you smack the hell out of the barrel, and get the bung out and taste right out of the barrel. It's a little easier in Kentucky to taste out of barrel than in Scotland, to be honest. And it's one of the best experiences, and I'm in love with Wild Turkey. And of course, Russell's is finally on people's radar, which, you know, I remember, you know, there was a period we had like 8 or 10 Russell's single barrels in stock, and my owners were just like all over us. What are you doing? It's the same product 10 times. Like, no, they're all different. And now people, you know, these sell out instantly, but they sat there for months and months and months and months and months, and nobody cared. But God, this barrel smells pretty good. Which barrel did I give you? Oh, the Wild. Yeah, that is good.
I was about to put people on the spot and be like, how does this compare to our barrel? But we're still waiting for ours. We picked one in September.
Oh yeah, well you have another several months before it's gonna come. I haven't gotten a Russell's in less than a year.
Wow.
Yeah, that's normal.
They told us like 3 months. We'll see in 90 days.
Hilarious.
No
Campari
offense.
is hilarious.
No offense to David, but ours is way better than yours.
I like her. There you go.
I bet. Someone over there must have liked you. Did you guys, they sent you samples?
No, we went to the warehouse and we met up with one of the Russells.
Who was it, Eddie?
Geez, no. Bruce.
Bruce?
Yep.
I love Bruce. I'm a big Bruce fan. Except he doesn't have an E name, so you got like it's like Jimmy, Eddie. I desperately want to call him Brucey, but he doesn't like it. So it goes. Anyway, it's pretty straightforward. It's freaking awesome Wild Turkey.
Jordan, are you happy? There's finally corn.
Very. I got the spicy, so I'm stoked to try the Wild. It's pretty excellent.
Yeah. Any questions about Kentucky or how that works? You know,
What do you mean you got the spicy? Everybody got the same sample.
No, sorry, the bottle I got. there were like 3 or 4 that came out, and the one I got was spicy. So I haven't tried any others.
Yeah.
This is so dusty. Very, very classic hard like bourbon.
Yeah, Wild Turkey, you know, it definitely has, you know, it's changed a little bit over the years. Like I do miss kind of they've cleaned it up a little bit. This still has a little bit of the dusty character. But we used to go to the warehouse and you'd have barrels where you're like, this is cool, but like you can barely get through it. Like it's so earthy, warehouse floor, musty, funky, and you're like, I like the idea of this, but I don't know if anybody else is going to want to drink this. So that, you know, that it's changed a little. Now they're a lot prettier, the whiskeys, and they're a lot more approachable, but not maybe as unique as they once were.
David, I'm still confused by this single Rickhouse product. Why was this single Rickhouse product from the Russells so popular?
Well, the Camp Nelson warehouses were always regarded as extremely high quality for producing good whiskeys. And I really think the question is why is it so expensive? And that's not a question that I can answer for you. I know why it's good. It's because Camp Nelson, like any single barrel we've ever had from Camp Nelson, has been excellent. It makes great whiskeys. That warehouse in particular has been demolished. So no other whiskeys until the next release of the Camp Nelson, which I'm sure they have, because they always do this.
Right, because
you know,
all of these single barrels are single rick houses also.
For sure. For sure. The distinction is between the climate and the style of warehouse. Tyrone, where the distillery is up on a hill. Camp Nelson is on the other side of the river. It's a different aging environment. Sort of over by like Camp Nelson is sort of closer
Four
to where
Roses.
the Four Roses distillery is. But it's just a matter, it's mostly hype, you know. If you've had a Camp Nelson single barrel, you know, they're good. They're really good. But so is Tyrone. Like, I'm with you. I don't think that they're so much better. I think what the hype is that warehouse is gone now. So there's going to be no more whiskeys coming out of there. And presumably those, you know, I assume that those are quite old whiskeys, right? In that barrel. That we'd hope so at $300. They give us
They
no
didn't-
information.
They didn't say, did they?
They wouldn't say, which means it's likely a blend of some younger barrels and some much, much older barrels. Which is cool. Like if it's worth, you know, Wild Turkey's always been so good about being restrained with the prices on some of the great things. This is a little bit disappointing to me to see that without a, you know, and at the same time they're selling a 13-year-old for like $100. You're like, where's the disconnect here? But I thought the whiskey was pretty damn good. So like, I'm not so angry at it. So
Is there an age statement on this?
No, never with Russell's. They never put the age statement on there. I can get you
if you look on the back, it's distilled 12 26 20 12
I
26
think you're the
12.
only one with the bottle, Madim.
Distilled 12
yeah,
26 12, dumped 5 16 22.
they put the details on it, but they won't put a proper age statement on it.
Yeah, there's no age statement, but you can, I mean, if you can do math, it's almost 10 years old.
It
Like
never
nine or
seems to
something.
make a full 10 years. It's always like a little bit short of 10 years.
What is Workhouse K? Does it have a fun name like Tyrone and Nelson?
Sorry?
Does Warehouse K have a fun name like Tyrone and Nelson?
That's Tyrone K. That's Tyrone K.
Oh, that doesn't make any sense. It'd
It's
be like Warehouse
well,
T.
Tyrone is the town where Wild Turkey is, and there's 22 warehouses or something there. So
Hmm.
you'll have A through whatever X.
Gotcha. Jordan reminded me that as we near our last pour, I want to invite everyone to jump on camera. That includes Patrick and Nicholas and Matthew and everyone else. And we do want to raise a glass to you, Dave, for making yourself available here tonight. And
Well, it's my pleasure, guys.
This
Thanks
has
for all
been
the support.
absolutely fantastic.
Wouldn't
So-
wouldn't be able to do this without you guys. So I really appreciate everything. And you know, I also want you to know, you know, I'm definitely here for you guys. So don't feel bad about blowing me up on emails or questions if something doesn't look right on the site or you whatever you need, you know, just holler at me. That's what I'm here for. So feel free. You all know where to
Appreciate it.
find me.
All right, everyone, raise a glass, smile to the camera, say cheers. Got it.
So David, the
Mm.
site went down on a couple days ago. Why did the site go down? Just kidding.
Turn off your
You
boss
said
hat.
ask any question. I'm kidding, 100%.
No, I can actually tell you why. You know, there's always it was like a Microsoft server update that didn't get any warning. So that's it. My IT guys were fucking pissed.
I
At
was just
Microsoft.
kidding, but thank you.
There you go. Yeah, it's not the best. So that's not good for us. Gives my operations guys like 15 minutes to breathe, which is nice. So from one column distilled spirit to another, I was surprised, no questions about my statement that there's no good pot distilled bourbon in the world. I still haven't found one. But if you know one, that's not true. I love Tom's Foolery, but that's a different story. We'll see. Maybe one of those Michter's Jug House one day. Those will come out pretty good. But can y'all think of one? I can't think of a good one. In any case, Armagnac, if you don't know it, this is the great brandy of the southwestern part of France, the oldest appellation name spirit maybe in the world, 900 years of Armagnac production plus. This is a really interesting story. So Las Graves is an estate that is now defunct. The family still owns it. You can get an Airbnb on the site, but the production doesn't exist any longer. And it became famous. If you guys pay attention to Armagnac at all, there's a prominent bottler called L'Encantada.
We had a tasting
And
with them.
there you go. They bottled a domain for several years. They apparently are all out of that they called Domaine La Fresh, and they always contended that it was, that they hadn't purchased the Armagnacs with the rights to use the name of the domain. The story is a little more complicated than that. But some super internet sleuths took a picture that they had shared on their social media of the vineyards and sort of geolocated it, and eventually came across this bottle, this estate, Domaine de las Graves, which was being sold in tiny quantities throughout Europe, and determined that Domaine La Fresh was this estate. That was 4 years ago. From the moment that we figured out who it was, it took me another 2 years to find these people. And when I finally did, they were more than happy to sell me their last barrel of Armagnac, which was shocking, at a ridiculously cheap price. And I found out that they had, in fact, the reason that Encantada didn't want to use their domain was that they had tried to sell the brand and the estate to Encantada. And Encantada passed and took the stocks, actually split the stocks with De Rose, the bottler, the famous bottler, De Rose of Armagnac. So if you ever see Cousin de la Salle, that is the same. No, I'm sorry, that's incorrect. That is, I apologize. That's not Las Graves. That is, there are other, but Loose Pibus. So similar idea. Anyway, they hadn't purchased the estate. They hadn't purchased the rights to use the name or the brand, and actually the brand is for sale still. So if anybody wants to start an Armagnac brand, this brand is for sale. There are no stocks available. This is the last barrel. That's not true. Each of the kids owns one barrel of 2002 and 2003 that are not ready for prime time yet. But after that, the domain is gone. So this would have been column distilled. It's likely a blend of various grapes, Baco, Uni Blanc, Folle Blanche, and all new oak for 32 years. Pretty awesome stuff. What do you guys think of this?
I was just texting. It's so good. Armagnac's so crazy because it's such a better value. You just get just this older stuff for so much less. It's just so excellent. It's really great.
I mean,
Yeah.
David, you guys just put up some 50-year-old Armagnac recently, which is, I've never seen that. Do you want to talk a little bit about the difference between like an 89 and a 1970, and if we're going to notice a
Don't
difference?
you have like a 63 or 64 on your website? It's like, is that some insane bottles for like $150? Like something stupid.
Yeah, I mean, part of why Armagnac is so inexpensive is that nobody buys it, right? So especially in France, French people don't particularly for this style of Armagnac, big, rich, tannic, intense, complex, high proof. The only people who like it there's a small group of whiskey geeks who get behind it, like the, you know, whiskey exchange guys sell this stuff. But in a general sense, there isn't a culture of drinking this there. The only people who are drinking it are the people in Gascon or in around the distilleries. And so it's wildly undervalued for the quality, the amount of work that goes into it, and for the age. There are some people trying to change that, and I respect that. But at the same time, you know, again, it needs to offer value, and that's part of why these are so special. You know, I think if we were charging $1,500 for this bottle, people would probably go, "Oh wow, it's a really awesome bottle." No, I'm not going to spend $1,500 for it. It probably is worth it, honestly. In compared to other $1,500 brandies in the world. If you just blind tasted them, you probably this would stand up nicely. But it's such a far-flung part of France, and it's just never really been commercialized. They don't have the commercial apparatus of cognac, and so you get these incredible brandies for almost nothing. So yeah, I'm praying that stays. You know, we're constantly searching for new stuff. So we got very lucky that, I mean, the reason those old Armagnacs are so cheap, if you read the story, it's that, you know, the dad died, the kids didn't want to deal with the business, they sold it to the neighbor for cheap. He's probably thinks he's making a killing on us, right, for what he's bought it for, because he buys it at a commodity rate, such and such flat rate plus so many euros per year, and you know, voila, he's made his money. He's got no brand he's trying to build around it. It's a very, you know, unusual thing. But you also have to think of this as these are people's, you know, for the region, these are mostly polyculture farmers, right? So they have watching Vadim pet his invisible cat is exceptional. So they have fields planted to, you know, to rape and to maybe to sunflowers, depending on what the EU is giving subsidies for that year, and then maybe they'll have a little, you know, a plot of trees that they grow to sell for paper, or maybe for barrels, to sell for barrels. And then they also, of course, do you know, probably some goose or duck for foie gras, and this is their life. And then they tend the vineyards and make the wine and distill this Armagnac, not to make a living. They make the Armagnac for their kids or their grandkids, so that they have something when, you know, when grandpa dies. Like, that's it. Then it's their savings account is what they look at it. But,
David?
so yeah.
So in wine, the vintage year is very important. You know, was the grapes grown in this year or that year? And wine aficionados are all over, you know, the vintage year. Oh, 1974 was a great year. 1979 was terrible, you know, blah, blah, blah. Is that true also of Armagnac? Do we need to know which years are good years and which years are not good years?
Yes and no. So there are a couple of ways to answer that. First of all, when great winemakers make great wine in bad years. When a winemaker says this is a great year or a bad year, they mean is it's an easy year or a hard year, right? A bad year means lots and lots of work in the vineyards, work in the cellar, work. Hard year, or they mean a low yield year. We had frost, we had mildew, we had those are, and of course, an easy year makes high quality grapes much easier, and so you have more good wine. And that's really the distinction. The goals in brandy production are different than in wine production. So what you're looking for in wine is concentration on the vine. You want the fruit to be concentrated in a state of ripeness so that the juices have complexity and flavor and what have you. In brandy production, you're concentrating it in the stills and in the barrels. So your goal in the vineyard is in fact the opposite. It is yield. You need yield and you need acidity. So you're growing the grapes in a very, very different way. So the good years in Bordeaux tend to be maybe sometimes harder years in Gascogne, in Armagnac, because they're fighting ripeness. If it's too ripe, if it's too high alcohol, and it's too low acid, it doesn't pass this through the stills easily. It makes for a hard distillation. Low acid base wines for brandy make for not long-term. You want high acidity for long-term eau de vie, for long-term aging. And the other thing is you want high yields so that you have brandy 30 years from now, right? If you only distill one barrel, you can only age so much brandy before you drink it or sell it all, right? So a good year is a productive year in terms of yield in brandy, because the concentration is so important, because it's happening after production. So yes, there are good years, but the good years are good for a different reason, and it's usually to do with how much they have. And so people will often say, oh, 79 is a good year. And you're like, well, why is 79 a good year? And it's like, well, because we have it, like it's here. and you're like, oh, that doesn't make sense. Armagnac is such a funny place like that. They don't make distinctions for quality the way that we do necessarily in the producer's mind. My favorite thing is to ask what flavors if we're lucky enough to get a distiller to actually taste with us while we're tasting, which is rare. And you ask them what do they think of the Armagnac, or what do they taste? Every single person all across Gascogne, it doesn't matter who it is, doesn't matter if it's a hardcore farmer or some aristocratic landowner guy from Paris, they always say prunes. Like, really? Is that you can only go get prunes? It's so funny. What are you spelling this? Pruno. I'm just like, okay, I guess it's prunes. Then you're like, oh, it does smell a little bit like Dr. Pepper, I guess. But so yeah, it's a complicated thing, but yeah, it is important. But just different goals than the wine, and I think yields are the real key factor, because if you want a great 40-year-old Armagnac, that means you need to have at least a few barrels, so that as it evaporates, you can consolidate them and keep them alive. Because the aging is very, very different from whiskey as well. So there's a lot more time, less so in cognac, in Armagnac than cognac. There's a lot of time though, what they call working the brandies, travail, to work the brandies, meaning you're aerating them and maybe 2 or 3 times a year you aerate them. So that means you pull them all out of the barrels, and you maybe mix them around in a tank, or if you have money, you'll buy a sprinkler system where you pump the brandies through these things in a big plastic drum, marry a certain batch or vintage, and then refill the casks so that they're full. Because the more evaporation you have, the quicker evaporation happens. There's certain limits they're allowed to have in terms of evaporation, or the government taxes them on brandy that they don't own or have. So they're very concerned with that. Other producers, like if you've had L'Incantadas Loose Pibus, were statically aged. So those were distilled in the 90s and early 2000s, filled into barrels, and never married or had eulage completed on them. And it is a completely unique style. There's nobody else doing that. I wish more people would, because obviously it makes amazing Armagnac, but it's not commercially viable for most people. And the only reason it worked is because it was a wealthy gentleman who wanted to spare no expense, and that's why. And he ended up abandoning the project anyway because it was too costly and didn't have a route to market in 2005 when he finally decided to give up. So 2007 or whatever it is.
So thank you for that color. So there isn't a particular year necessarily that we need to avoid. If something is available, then that's probably all we need to know.
Yeah, I'd say good producers are making good brandy almost every year. There are some oddball years, like you'll mid 70s, like there's some ones you never see, and that's probably because they had bad harvest, right? So they had less availability. But I think a lot of it comes out in the wash, right? With the stills, you can screw up a lot of things after it's distilled as well. Of course, bad barrels, this or that. I mean, good Armagnac generally, not exclusively, but it comes out of good new Gascogne wood. So that's everybody says they use local wood, but it's impossible, right? So someone like Louis Pibou or Las Graves, these guys actually, they were only making a handful of barrels a year, right? And you can see the oak trees on the property, and they can point to where they cut down the oak tree for that year, like that stuff makes a difference. But in terms of the quality of the grapes, don't buy 2002. Like, that's a bad year. Don't buy anything in southern France in 2002. Wine or Burgundy and Champagne, a great year. Southern France was underwater, so skip it. Yeah, there's no 2002. I haven't seen 2002 in ages. So there you go.
Okay, so we can't buy this Armagnac because it's all gone. So it's funny because Jane and I were talking last night, and I said, I'm sure all of the stuff that we're going to taste tonight is available because they got to know we're going to buy. And Jane was like, well, I hope not all of them are available because then I'll be too tempted. And unfortunately, there's only one bottle available to us tonight. I have to say, it was one of my favorites, so I'm happy. But these were
that Boonah's good. Is the old Poldy sold out as well?
Yeah,
these were so good, all of them.
a couple of days ago.
There you go.
So
yeah, unfortunately, it's tough to do one of these retrospective sort of tastings without, these great ones. They go, they go fast. So it's it's really tough. I hope to get more Las Graves in the future, but it's very, very, very unlikely.
is there another Armagnac? Because I actually really like Armagnac, and I haven't had a great one lately. And I've been reviewing your webpage thinking I'm going to press buy on one of these, but I haven't done.
I mean, there's nothing quite on this level available right now. The one you want to look at is the Coussard de La Salle. Oh, there is a 2002 Coussard. Avoid that one. But the other two, the 05 and the 03, are from that famous estate that I was talking about that has the Louis Pibou estate from L'Encantada. It's the same distillery. That said, I have a huge amount of Armagnac on the water coming now. And the brand that I would recommend you look for that offer really high quality for the value are Cardinat and Barraillon, Domaine de Claverie. Barraillon is exceptionally good. Not as punchy and intense as the Las Graves, but if you want to reach out to me, and I can go through. I literally bought every vintage that they would give me of Barillon because it's just so good, and we've been selling it for a decade plus. So you may have seen us push it in the past, but there's an 84, an 86, an 80, 89, a 98 Folle Blanche. All of these are extremely delicious and a little more expensive than something like Cardinal, but very, very, very well regarded. You can see, you know, who's done some good reviews of them. Whiskey Fun. You guys like? Do you know? Do you know that website? Anybody want do? Is a Whiskey Fun fans here? No,
Serge
not so much.
Valentine.
Yeah, Serge Valentine. He writes up some of the Barillons pretty colorfully. They're fun reads, and that's an estate that I would definitely look after. If you click like Barillon, Baraillon, and then include out of stock on our website, you'll see like hundreds of vintages of it. Most of these will be available again. And you can just set yourself up for the alert for subsequent vintages.
So you earlier explained the difference in Armagnac and Cognac, right? It's a different distillation, it's a different process overall, but in general, I think most people don't understand. I mean, as far as taste goes, it's just a more flavorful version of Cognac, or completely different, or how would you like?
I think the
down?
goals are different, and you know, Cognac is all about consistency and providing a consistent product across an agricultural vintage. You know, brandy is not like whiskey. You can make the same whiskey today as you do, you know, barley is much more consistent in terms of flavor after distillation than grapes are, because of the vintage aspect, because of the fact that you can only harvest a vineyard once a year. And so there are really different goals, not to mention the difference in production. Cognac is pot stilled, alembic pot stills. So they take whatever, 200 liters or 500 liters of wine, it goes into the pot, they heat it up, it boils up and goes through the worm tubs, and, and then they do it again. And that spirit often comes off the still quite fine, refined, clean spirit. They've taken a head and a tail cut. They get the hard cut, and that maybe is 70+% alcohol. And then either that'll go straight into the barrel, or add a little bit of water maybe, and that goes into the barrel bed. And generally with Cognac, they're gonna use new oaks, quote unquote, for a tiny amount of time, like 3 or 6 months, if it's a first fill barrel. And then if it's a second fill barrel, maybe it'll go for 6 to 12 months. And if it's a third fill barrel, it'll go for 12 to 18 months in that third fill barrel, and still be considered a new barrel. And then after that third fill, it's considered an old barrel, and you would take that brandy out and put it into a different old barrel, right? Or leave it in if it's a third fill, maybe. And then straight off the bat, they're blending, right? They're thinking about, okay, this feels like it's going to be for our VS. It's getting mature quickly. It's fruity. It's bright and fresh. That's going to go into the VS. This lot is heavier. It's richer. It's not as mature. It's got more acidity or whatever it is. That feels like the XO. So that's going to go into the back part of this cellar, and we're going to start blending it with these other brandies that are from last year. And then, as it goes through, they eventually concentrate it into like kind of a large vat where all the XO is held. And then when the XO is bottled, it's taken from the bottom of that vat. They take out a quarter of it. They fill a quarter in with the next subsequent XO, so that it mixes and marries and gets consistency over time. With Armagnac, it's very different. They distill. If they have money, they buy barrels. If they don't, they fill old barrels and they throw them anywhere they freaking can. Of course, there are bigger operations that don't do this. And in a general sense, cognac is much more industrialized um, and commercialized than Armagnac in a general sense. But they only separate them by vintage, and then they'll keep them that way because the blending is being done generally before bottling. So when they want to make an XO in Armagnac, which is not really what we're after, although we do sell some of these Hordage and XOs, we're mostly focused on vintage Armagnac. Then they're going to go in and make an assemblage and pick some 10-year-old and a barrel of 20 and a barrel of 50, and that's going to be their XO or whatever it is. And that's sort of how it works. Whereas the cognacs are much more focused on that blend and that house style developing, from the very, very first part of distillation. So those are the main differences. And then the Armagnac still is this single distilled thing. So one pass, no head cuts, because you cannot really cut the heads on a, comes out of the still done. Comes out of the still at 56% alcohol. There's nothing to cut, right? It's all the same juice, front to back. And that doesn't really need water added. It also is lower proof than cognac, so it won't age as long. Because obviously it needs to be bottled before it's 40 proof, and they can do things to keep the proof up, but it does lose proof over time for sure. And yeah, those are the main differences in terms of production between cognac and Armagnac. I'd say the structures of the industries are very, very different as well, so that's another factor.
Are there French? Because I mean, those are both regions, right? So are
yeah,
there
absolutely,
French
it's very similar to
brandies
wine.
look out for?
The three main French brandies are Armagnac, Cognac, and Calvados. There are a couple of other things out there that can be interesting. Marc de Jura or de Bourgogne, which is basically barrel-aged grappa of high quality lees of wine, which can be good. And in Burgundy as well, they make a Fine, which is a distillate of finished wine, Fine de Bourgogne. But they don't generally have the character and complexity they're more of a regional specialty, and they can be good, but not quite like 32-year-old Las Gras is not gonna come across. There are, of course, French brandies being distilled elsewhere, lots of fruit brandies as well, eau de vie and what have you, which can be exceptional. But those are the main regions that you're gonna want to focus on.
Thank you. What are your thoughts on fruit brandies in general?
I love them.
That's a good thought.
Yeah, I like them. That we don't get a lot of the great ones here, but when you get a Roquelt, eau de vie, or schnapps from Austria, or a great Mirabelle or awesome Kirsch from Switzerland or something like that, it makes exceptionally delicious. Again, a bit of an acquired taste. You have to sort of be open to that experience for sure.
So that is a good lead into a question I was going to ask, which is, what are you excited or interested in? Like what's new and different that has caught your eye recently?
Oh gosh, wow. Well, new and different. I really like what the Found North guys are doing. Have you seen those? That's pretty different. Had some really good stuff from them. But kind of a purist. It's like I don't know if there are too many unexplored categories out there left. It was Japanese whiskey 10 years ago, and then 5 years ago it was Taiwanese whiskey, and I presume there will be something else one day. Whether they can match or beat what Scotland or any of these other ones are doing, I doubt it. But you never know. There was a period when I was really super excited about, whiskey from Bretagne in France, like Cornog. If you've ever had Cornog, or see it, it is awesome. It's basically, Islay whiskey being made in the north of northwestern France, and but it's minuscule. I mean, it barely exists. So right now, I'm most excited about, still the same things I always have been: Calvados, Armagnac, single malt Scotch, when I can find it, bourbon, mezcal, still there, and sort of rum. Rum is a thing. Rum is definitely a factor. But the great rums I feel like have already come and gone. And it's just sad. It's like it's the really good stuff is super, super expensive now, and rum like makes bourbon and even Scotch look, cheap sometimes. So
Which takes
it's
some time, but yeah.
yeah,
some
yeah,
of them we were like, wow, that sounds amazing.
yeah, yeah. But when I want like 25-year-old Hamden, which is, if you guys haven't had that, I mean, I don't know if you guys have messed with any of the high ester Jamaican stuff. If you're an Islay fan, you're an Islay whiskey fan, you should highly consider some of the high ester aged Jamaican stuff. It has a similar effect on the psyche. So I would definitely try and explore that, but those are already very, very hard to find and very expensive. So that said, so is Isla. Like, I don't know when the last time we had a nice aged Isla, that wasn't $200, or $400 or $600. It's crazy. Oh, we had those great redacted brother Lefroy. So did you guys take anybody get that? You got one? Yeah, those are special. I mean, but
Do
few
you
and far
have any
between.
more of the 31-year-olds left? I've been looking for that.
I mean, I own some, but I don't have any for sale, and I'm not planning to sell them to anybody.
Did K&L get the whole allotment, or?
They sold other barrels to other markets, but for those 3 barrels, it was exclusively K&L. Yeah,
That 31-year-old was amazing.
yeah, those were really spectacular barrels. I mean, it's not hard, 30-year-old Lefroy, it's gonna be good generally.
Have you seen any softening lately? The reports on the news suggest that the economy and consumers are backing off their purchases. Have your sales at K&L shown any softness lately?
It's such an uncertain market. It's hard to say exactly where things are going. We're taking advantage, I think, of, some really unique qualities of K&L. So I might not be the best indicator of where the economy is going. Because I have heard other stores are struggling or are slow. We're not actually that slow. Although I could see us being slow soon, maybe, but I don't know. It doesn't. I know that there is this softening in interest in like investor grade whiskey buying, particularly because money isn't cheap, right? So when money's cheap, taking 10% of your portfolio and dumping into whiskey isn't that crazy an idea, because you're not getting a return. You're not getting a return anywhere else, and the whiskey market is a pretty safe bet if you know what you're doing. But then the stupid money comes in, and it's when the people don't care whether it's Pappy bottled in 2002 or Pappy bottled in 2018, and it's $8,000 either way. The system's broken. Like, nobody's caring. It's done. So yeah, I'm concerned for that sort of level, but we don't really deal on that. Like we just had this. Did you guys see the Douglas Lang blended malts that came in this week? It's these $300 whiskeys, and the importer was willing to give it to us for a third of the price. We'd already sold it once for half the price, and now it's even half that. So, if where all the big companies are raising their prices 20 or 30% every 6 months, and then finally Macallan 18 is sitting on our shelves. It's not because people don't want to drink Macallan 18, it's because they don't want to drink it for $425, right? And in the end, people weren't drinking it in the first place. They were just buying it to put it on the shelf or gift it to people or look fancy or whatever it is. And it's not a very smart business proposition. So we've already seen prices start to come down in some places, which is really, really interesting. And I think if we can keep getting deals and keep providing value for people, even if the economy goes, south or south-ish, I think we'll probably be okay. The writer strike doesn't help our business in LA, I'll tell you what, but neither does, SVB in San Francisco. That was not great for anybody either. So, yet, we're a couple of percentage points above last year, and the 2 years before that were, gangbusters. So the fact that we're even getting close to what we were doing, during COVID, when nobody had anything else to drink, is great, I think. And hopefully opening a new store is gonna keep that going and meet new customers. I still meet people all the time who are into this, into whiskey, into wine, and haven't heard of Can-L or been to Can-L. I'm like, I can't Google anything without my website popping up. Like, have you not noticed it before? But maybe that's the algorithm following me around. I don't know. So in any case, I hope that answers your question. Was that sufficient? Great.
Is
What
there
would
a
you say?
timeline for the new store? Oh, sorry.
Sorry?
Is there a timeline for the new store and location? I've heard it teased, but
Culver City is the location. We have the space. We're waiting for licensing. We're hoping for this year. And Hollywood will stay open as long as we can. So they're developing that strip of land. But of course, they planned this 3 years ago when infinite free money for anybody building anything. And so, it seems like they're kind of kicking the brakes. So we might have a little extra time. And then they promised me that whenever Hollywood does close, they'll have another store in the pipeline behind it. So
okay,
that's good.
great
Yeah,
update. Thanks.
of course.
We did a poll for the favorite malt of the night. You want to guess what the favorite one was in this group? Just the malts.
GlenDronach.
Interesting. You're 100% correct.
I chose the Klein list.
All right. Well, GlenDronach took 48% of the votes. That's impressive. That's a landslide, essentially. 11 votes for GlenDronach, 6 for Clynelish, 4 for Buna, and then 2 for Old Pulteney. Wow. All right.
I
Yeah,
love you, old
yeah.
people.
But that's not to say that they weren't all excellent, but we had to choose one.
You
surely
did.
did.
One. That's true. Let's see do you think the GlenDronach can stand on the overall of the night?
I can't imagine you guys picked the Armagnac. Maybe that'd be mind blowing.
Enjoy having
Oh,
mind
you
blown.
did. Oh yeah, that Armagnac is sick. I
The
will.
Armagnac overtook, and there's and obviously Jordan picked the Russells. Yeah, well,
The Russell's is good.
I
It is
picked
good.
Armagnac for the record.
Oh, let the record show.
Oh,
Council said Armagnac. What's up?
Damn, from the bourbon guy.
Oh, corn is crying everywhere in the fields right now. Yeah, so there you go. Armagnac took it for the night. That's amazing. Thanks for including that one for us.
Oh
I'm glad we
God,
made-
I'm glad
made
you
that
guys
call.
enjoyed it. Thank
Well,
God.
thanks for including all these bottles that we cannot buy.
At least you got
There's
to
a-
taste them. Hopefully, you
You
have a
get to
little bit
try
of your
it.
samples left.
And then there's a bunch of Armagnacs on the KNL website right now that are. I was looking at some really really old stuff for like $100. It's 150 is crazy.
Yeah, those Grangeries are fun. And then do look through the Barayons. I will say, because some of them will go fast. The Barayons coming, and they're still a couple months away, but you should put some alerts on those because it's going to be the same vintages as we have there. And I have some write ups on them, and they're pretty bonkers. Really.
I couldn't find a way to put an alert on it.
So
'Cause
if
it-
you go to whatever particular vintage, you just hit the add to waiting list button.
Yeah, but when I do a search on Baryon, it doesn't come up at all.
Oh, hit include out of stock items,
Yeah, thanks.
and then that'll list it by vintage. It says 32 different vintages. So I'd recommend putting a note on the 86. The 98 Folle Blanche is excellent. The 84 is coming as well. It's very good.
David,
I
do you
think
say that
that's-
those that's the equivalent of Loup Pibou?
No, Loup-Pibou is the Couzard de la Salle, Couzard. We have those bottled by DeRose. Slightly different in that they have been after 2005 they went into a more traditional aging scheme, so they likely did do some Eulage after they moved into the other bottlers cellars, whereas L'Encantada kept them in the estate cellars and then pulled them out barrel by barrel. So slightly different, but that's the closest thing to Loose Pibus that you'll get, because it is Loose Pibus. It's just slightly different. Little bit of water added, a little bit of Eulage. Still that big, rich. You can see the red color that someone mentioned before about the red, the French oak, the European oak. It's very, very distinctive in there. That's Gasconia wood there.
Man, I think the big win for us and KNL is the trying that Armagnac and opening our eyes to just how good some of that stuff can be. It's fantastic.
Yeah, there's really special stuff out there, and it's not expensive. I mean, for what you're getting, you can really do some damage for it's kind of like the old days of, it's still weirdly, it's still like the old days of bourbon in some ways, where you're getting these outrageously old things for $100 or whatever it is.
Yeah, I got that 57-year-old for 150. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah. And it's good. It's super solid. It's fun. It's fun old brandy. Those are that Grangerie deal is like kind of unheard of. Like, it shouldn't be that cheap, but take it while you can. So the 75 is my favorite of actually the three of the super old ones. By the way. All right, guys, I'm crashing out here.
One last thing before you leave, you got to
yeah.
tell us, what are you most excited for coming into the store? Because I have a lot of like coming soon malts that dropped recently that I'm watching. And what are you most excited for? And I have 2 pieces of feedback that I do want to throw your way.
Okay.
I need a wish list that's not my cart, and put a date in the description of when it's getting posted. Because like, I'll search some of the stuff that's out of stock, and I don't know if it was out of stock 3 months ago, or if it's out of stock because it's coming soon, or if it's out of stock because it was 10 years ago. That's all.
Will you email me about those specifically?
Yeah.
The wait list, I've been trying to get them to do that fucking
A wish
decade.
list, right? Because
Wish
right
list,
now
yeah,
I have to, like, every bottle I'm watching, I put it into my cart, and like, and then when I have to buy something rapidly, I end up with 6 bottles instead of 1.
Yeah, I don't know why they haven't done it. They were talking about doing just like a heart thing where they can just put a
Yeah.
little heart, like click a heart, but I don't know why they haven't implemented that. So that is definitely on the radar. I can't imagine. I think they think that using the waiting list thing is sufficient. Which I don't agree with, but yeah, apparently
Well, there's no
it's-
waiting list for things that are in stock. So if it's in stock and I'm waiting and looking at it and trying to think about it, it's only add to cart or go kick rocks.
Yeah, or bookmark the page, right? That's
Yeah.
one option. Because those pages are static. So once you bookmarked it,
Oh,
it's
interesting.
there.
I did not consider that.
They never
Okay.
change. Yeah. Yeah, I get that. And then the date of what did you want me to
Oh,
add the dates to?
some of the stuff, obviously, I guess I'm mostly interested in malts because the bourbon sells out instantly, but malt tastes better anyway. Some of the coming soon stuff. What are you most excited for? Because there's a lot to choose from. Like the
Oh, and-
Glenbergie 27 looks phenomenal, but it's $200. So
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, let me run down the list of old particulars that's about to show up. I'd say those are the things that I'm most excited about. Let's see here.
Hey, Vadim,
Mhm.
do you want the recording on for this or do you want it off?
I don't know, David. Do you want the recording on or off?
I don't care. I'm an open book, so let's
Sounds
see
good.
here.
When it gets posted, it's private anyway, so only we know where it is.
There you go. All right. So just in the next, it's just landed. Let me get to go on OneDrive. Bear with me. Old particular. So we are getting a 25-year-old Ardmore, a 9-year-old Aaron, a 12-year-old Etruscan refill sherry for $55. Solid
How
B
much is
plus
that,
whiskey.
Aaron?
Aaron is, I'm listing it at 60, 65, something like that.
Okay.
A bourbon barrel of Blair Athol, 13-year, a 25-year-old sherry butt of Blair Athol, a 10-year-old named Lefroy for $90, which is badass. A 14-year-old Highland Park in Hogshead, 2 Kalilas, an 11-year in Hogshead and 8-year in Bourbon, and a 14-year-old Bunnahabhain, and a 15-year-old Glengoyne. So those are exciting. The Dalmore and Aberlour in Sherry from Hart Brothers, which are that was their penance for taking away my Glendronach, which I don't think is equal, but they're very, very good casks, and they're like $70 for heavy sherry Dalmore cast strength. I think it's 80 or 90 for an Aberlour 11-year dark sherry as well. Those are gonna
It's
be
funny.
really,
I love Aberlour, and their last Aberlour last year just did not agree with me at all.
very un-Aberlour-y Aberlour.
Yeah.
Aberlour is supposed to be sherry. I mean, it loves the sherry, like that's the thing. So
I just reread
yeah.
your Pulteney notes for the 10-year. Nowhere does it say pine anywhere. Not on the nose, not on the
Really?
palate. Yeah.
Oh,
The 10-year Pulteney, like I was like, there's
had a
doesn't say
bad
pine.
maybe I had COVID or something.
Like that, like the what is it? Remember when I came back into the store and talked to you about the other piney one that I got? I think it was a Glengarry. I
Oh,
was like, is
so
this
that was
right?
so ginny. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
so ginny. That was pure. Yeah, that was real piney. I think I did mention that in that one though.
I don't
In the
remember reading the review, but I just like I keep hitting these piney ones for no reason.
maybe I like the pine. I do like. I mean, you're an acid drinker, so you never know. But yeah, that's funny. I don't remember it. Now that I think about it, I think I'm getting the Glengarry and the Pulteney because you mentioned that too. I don't remember that Pulteney being super piney. I'll have to revisit it. Because yeah, I remember you came in with that bottle and it was like so ginny. That was you got 2 of those, huh? Well, in any case, those are the ones to look out for. The Glenbergie is gorgeous. Those are quite well-known stocks. The 95 that Bergie sort of period is quite good. Of course, they're expensive, but actually they're not expensive for 27-year-old good space side. $200 is low, right? These days. I mean, even 5 years ago, that would have been a pretty good deal. So I'm pretty happy with almost all the redacted stuff. The Williamson from Redacted is really, really tasty, as is the Worthy Park. The rum is awesome. So, but I'll open them all. We can do another one of these with all the malts, right?
Yeah, would love to.
Yeah, coming up soon. They're all going to be here in the next few weeks. So let's set a date. And then we have that rum thing. That's going to be fun. Definitely don't skip that.
Yeah,
Working
it's
on
on
a
the
rum
bag. We're
tasting
doing a
for
rum thing very soon.
you. Hopefully,
Yeah, for sure.
should be fun. Should be fun. So,
David, how much is the 25-year-old Ardmore going to be?
$200.
That's a great deal.
Yeah, it's a weird Ardmore though. I will warn you, it is not peaty. So very unusual.
So it's not the ethereal peat of a typical Ardmore.
If it was peaty once, it is not obviously so now. It feels very old school, very Highland, old school, honey and heather and that sort of stuff. Then again, I have tasted in several months. They send me the tiniest samples for these whiskeys, so I crush those. So I'll have proper notes up soon on those. I expect those to sell out instantly. Those take a little bit more time, but
I love a good Blair Athol. I'm looking forward to those. So you got a couple
Oh.
coming, right?
yeah, we have the 13-year and then 25-year dark sherry. That one's expensive, but it's those old funky weird Blair Athols and kind of hard to find now.
Yeah, I've recently discovered like Blair Athol, Dalyuan, Linkwood, Tianinic. Those are like ones I search out for, and they're always very
Sure.
low priced. Glenburgie's.
Yeah.
Who was it? It was John that put me on a Glenburgie. That's just I've been looking for them everywhere.
Yeah, they can be very, very good.
For sure.
All
Well,
right,
thank you
guys.
so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. And
Appreciate your
I guess
time.
we'll be doing another one of these soon. All right.
Sounds good, Dave. Thank you so much. We'll see you in the store.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks.
So good.
Out. Thanks so much.